Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something fundamental, something you use every single second language, but maybe in ways you haven't quite thought about. Like, have you ever imagined a language made just of whistles? It sounds like something out of fiction, but on La Gomera, one of Spain's Canary Islands, they have Silbo Gomero. It's basically whistled Spanish. And it's incredible. Messages can travel 7 kilometers across these huge ravines. Kids learn it just like speaking.
Yeah, and it's not just a historical relic. I read that herdsmen, like this guy Pancho, still use it today to call their goats. It's a living language.
Amazing. Or picture this, Kong Village in Meghalaya, India. Everyone there has a musical name tune, like a short little melody for around the house.
And a longer one for the forest. The idea being it confuses evil spirits. It's tied into their whole matriarchal society honoring clan mothers.
And get this, some villagers now name their tunes after Bollywood songs, which is just a fantastic blend of old and new.
And you see similar things like whistled systems in parts of Turkey, too. It really hammers home how our environment, our landscape, can fundamentally shape how we communicate.
Okay, so let's unpack this. These examples, they're fascinating, right? But they point to something much bigger. Language isn't just a tool like a hammer. It's more like a window into our identity, our culture, even how we think. So today, our deep dive is into linguistic anthropology. We're going to explore how language makes us human, drawing on some really comprehensive research. Let's start right at the core. What really makes human language so different from, say, animal communication? A dog barks, a bird sings. What's the big deal about our way?
Well, a huge difference, and you touched on it, is displacement.
Right, displacement, meaning we can talk about stuff that isn't right here, right now.
Exactly. Animal calls are almost always immediate. Danger now, food here, mating call now. But humans, we can discuss, what happened last week, plan for next year, or even talk about unicorns or hypothetical situations.
Things that don't even exist outside our minds.
Precisely. That ability to detach language from the immediate context is, well, uniquely human.
And what about creating new sentences? That seems pretty special too.
That's the other key piece. Productivity, or generativity sometimes it's called. We have a finite set of sounds, maybe 40-odd phonemes in English, a finite vocabulary, though it's large, but we can combine them in practically infinite ways. Think about it. You can say a sentence right now that has likely never been uttered before in the history of the universe.
Huh. Yeah, I guess that's true. Animals don't really invent new calls on the fly, do they?
Not with the same kind of complex, rule-governed creativity. They have set calls for set situations. We have grammar, syntax rules that let us generate endless meaning. So language, fundamentally, it's this system, spoken, written, signed symbols, that connects our thoughts, our social lives, and how we pass down culture.
And where did this incredible ability even come from? The origins must be fascinating to think about.
Oh, they are. And highly speculative, of course, because language doesn't fossilize. You have divine creation stories from various cultures, Adam naming animals, the Tower of Babel explaining language diversity.
Of myths trying to make sense of it.
Then you get the natural sound theories, the ding-dong idea that we imitated sounds in nature, or poo-poo, like involuntary cries of emotion, bow-wow, imitating animals, ta-ta, maybe mimicking hand gestures with the tongue. Kind of quaint ideas, perhaps.
Simplistic, maybe.
Perhaps. Then there are the necessity theories. Language arose because we needed it for warnings, for coordinating work, the sort of yo-heave-ho idea. Or even, interestingly, some argue for lying.
Lying? How so?
The idea is once early humans got good at reading facial expressions, maybe language evolved partly as a way to conceal true intentions, to deceive more effectively. A bit cynical, but possible.
Wow. Okay, beyond the speculation, what about our biology? Surely that plays a role.
Absolutely crucial. Our anatomy is unique. We have flat teeth, helpful for F and V sounds, flexible lips for P's and B's, and critically, a lowered larynx compared to other primates.
Which gives us a bigger voice box space.
Exactly, a larger pharynx, which allows for a much wider range of vowel and consonant sounds. The trade-off is we choke more easily, but it enables complex speech. There's also the idea that walking upright, bipedalism, freed our hands. Toolmaking became more complex, and that stimulated areas of the brain, like Broca's and Wernicke's areas, which later became central to language processing.
So tool use and language might be linked neurologically.
That's a prominent theory.
Right.
And then you have Noam Chomsky's perspective, more genetic. The idea that we're born with an innate capacity for language, a language acquisition device, or LAD, and a kind of universal grammar.
Like a blueprint for language in our brains.
Sort of, and this might be linked to specific genes like FOXP2. A mutation in this gene seems to have been critical for developing fine motor control of the mouth and larynx needed for speech.
So it's this mix of displacement, productivity, our biology. It all comes together to make language truly fundamental to being human.
It really does. It's not just one thing, it's this complex interplay.
Now, linguistic anthropology itself, as a field, fits within the bigger picture of anthropology, right?
Yes, it's typically seen as one of the four main subfields in the U.S. tradition, alongside sociocultural, biological, and archaeological anthropology. They all offer different lenses on the human experience, and language is woven through all of them.
And within linguistic anthropology, there are different ways to study language.
Definitely. We can break it down into roughly four major areas, each looking at language through a slightly different cultural lens. First up is historical linguistics.
Okay, so that's about how languages change over time.
Precisely. It traces how languages evolve, how they diverge from common ancestors, and even tries to reconstruct those ancestors called proto-languages. The classic example is Proto-Indo-European. Nobody ever wrote it down, but by comparing later languages like Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, linguists can infer what it might have sounded like.
Like finding patterns.
Exactly. Sir William Jones in the 18th century noticed words like patar in Latin, patas in Greek, and pitter in Sanskrit all meant father. He figured they must have come from a common source.
Linguistic detective work.
It really is. They use methods like glottochronology, sort of like linguistic carbon dating, measuring pronunciation shifts to estimate when languages split, and they work on deciphering ancient scripts, like cuneiform or Brahmi, opening up whole new chapters of history.
Fascinating. Okay, so that's history. What about looking at a language now, how it's built?
That's the domain of descriptive or structural linguistics. This focuses on analyzing and describing the structure of a language as it exists today, especially languages that don't have a long history of being written down.
So breaking it down into its parts.
Yes, looking at the sounds, phonetics, and phonemes, phonetics studies all the possible sounds, like slight variations that don't change meaning. Phonemes are the sounds that do change meaning in a specific language, like B and P in English bit versus pit. Totally different words because of one phoneme.
How many of those critical sounds does English have?
English has around 44 phonemes. Mandarin Chinese has over 100, which gives you an idea of the variety. Then you look at morphemes, the smallest units of meaning. Cow is one morpheme. Unfriendly is 3 morphemes. And then syntax, the rules for combining these into sentences.
The grammar we all learned or tried to learn in school.
Pretty much. It's about understanding the nuts and bolts of how a specific language works.
Okay, what's next?
Third, we have ethnolinguistics. This looks directly at the relationship between language and culture, how language reflects a particular group's way of life, their environment, their worldview.
So like the examples we started with, the whistled languages, the name tunes.
Exactly like those. Or consider the Hanunu people in the Philippines. Researchers found they have over 1,600 names for plants, and they actively use almost all of them. Their language reflects their deep botanical knowledge. And contrast that with, say, some villagers in northern India who traditionally use just one word for snow, rain, hail, and dew. Why? Because making those distinctions wasn't crucial for their daily lives. Language carves up the world based on cultural relevance.
So language reflects what's important to a culture. Makes sense. And the fourth area?
Sociolinguistics. This is all about language in its social context. How do things like social class, gender, age, ethnicity, even your aspirations, influence how you speak?
Okay, I can see this one playing out all the time.
Definitely. Think about regional dialects or the specific slang used by teenagers, or how someone might change their accent depending on who they're talking to, maybe sounding more proper in a job interview.
Like the example of Priyanka Chopra's accent shifting when she moved from Bollywood to Hollywood.
That's a perfect example of sociolinguistics in action. Or studies looking at gendered speech patterns. Are women socialized to use softer tones or ask more questions? Are men encouraged to be more direct or interrupt more? How do different generations use language, like incorporating emojis or memes? It's all sociolinguistics.
It really shows language isn't just static rules, it's alive. It breathes with the community. Understanding these structures helps us see how language both mirrors and shapes our social worlds.
Which leads us right into a really big and sometimes controversial idea in the field, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Yes, the idea that language doesn't just reflect reality, it actually shapes it, shapes how we think.
That's the core of it. The stronger version suggests language determines thought. The weaker version suggests it influences it. Most linguists today lean towards the influence part. The examples are intriguing. Take grammatical gender. In Hebrew, every noun is grammatically masculine or feminine. Studies suggest Hebrew-speaking children learn to categorize things by gender earlier than, say, Finnish-speaking children whose language doesn't have grammatical gender.
So the grammar itself pushes a certain way of categorizing the world.
Potentially, yes. Or think about spatial orientation. Some languages, like Hopi, rely heavily on landscape features uphill, downstream, rather than abstract compass points like north or south. Their language reflects a different way of orienting in space.
That factory worker study sounds relevant here too.
Yes, the comparison between Swedish and Finnish workers. Swedish has grammatical ways to encode three-dimensional space that Finnish traditionally lacked, focusing more on two dimensions. The researchers suggested this linguistic difference might have contributed to Swedish workers having fewer accidents involving spatial judgment.
Wow. That's a potentially significant real-world impact. It makes you wonder about links to things like dyslexia or spatial awareness differences.
It does raise fascinating questions about the interplay between language structure and cognitive processing.
But it's not all one way, right? Culture obviously shapes language too.
Absolutely. That's the counterargument, often framed as cultural determinism. The idea that societal needs and cultural practices drive vocabulary development.
Like the Noah herders in Sudan.
Exactly. Their entire life revolves around cattle, so they have, I think it's over 250 words, for different kinds of cattle based on color, horn shape, age. Their cultural focus created a rich vocabulary.
Or that term for the Marshall Islands, Curaprop.
Yes, a specific word they coined after nuclear testing to describe a particular tragic type of stillbirth they started observing, one that resembled a cluster of grapes. A harrowing example of culture needing a new word for a new reality.
And Urdu evolving as a specific court language.
Right, tailored for the politeness and formality required in the mobile courts. Culture shaped the language's style and vocabulary. So really, the consensus is that it's a two-way street. Language influences thought and perception, and culture shapes language and vocabulary. They're constantly interacting, enriching each other.
Like Alfred Kroeber said. Culture needed speech to get going, and then they spurred each other on.
Precisely. But Edward Sapir's caution is also important. We see and hear and otherwise experience very largely as we do because the language habits of our community predispose certain choices of interpretation. We're kind of gently guided by our language.
It makes you think about those etic versus emic perspectives Kenneth Pike talked about.
Yes, the outsider's objective view versus the insider's meaningful categories. It highlights how deep these linguistic influences can run.
Which really brings it back to you, the listener. How much are you shaped by the words you use every day? How different might your world look through the lens of another language? Something to chew on. Let's shift now to language in action. How it functions out there and the messy reality of society. It changes so much depending on the context, doesn't it?
Dramatically. We have regional dialects, of course, but also sociolects ways of speaking tied to specific social groups like class or ethnicity.
And people switch between styles all the time.
That's code switching, very common for bilinguals. You might speak one language with your family and another at work, or even mix them within a single conversation depending on the topic or who you're talking to. Think Hindi-English mixing or Hinglish in India.
What's diglossia?
Diglossia, a term from Charles Ferguson, describes situations where a community uses two distinct varieties of the same language for different purposes. A high variety for formal settings, literature, sermons, political speeches, and a low variety for everyday conversation, jokes, markets.
Like formal, written Arabic versus spoken dialects.
Exactly. Or maybe the very formal Hindi an MP might use in Parliament versus the Hindi used to haggle at a vegetable stall. Same language, different registers or flavors.
We also see blending in border areas, right?
Yes, people might weave together vocabulary and grammar from neighboring languages. And then you have communities of practices, smaller, tight-knit groups that develop their own insider jargon. Think of, I don't know, gamers or surgeons or even close groups of friends.
Like that Sikh speak from Sex and the City.
Yes, things like gaydar or specific coded phrases. It builds group identity.
And that identity aspect is huge, especially when it comes to nations.
Oh, massively. In Europe, many nation-states are explicitly linked to a language: France and French, Italy and Italian. Language became a cornerstone of national identity.
And in places with many languages, like India.
There, linguistic diversity often fuels strong regional identities. Language can become a very powerful political tool for unification or division.
Like the situation with Bangladesh.
A key example, West Pakistan's refusal to grant Bengali official language status was a major grievance that fueled the movement for an independent Bangladesh. Conversely, Tanzania, with over 120 ethnic groups, deliberately chose Swahili, a trade language not strongly associated with any single dominant group, as the national language to promote unity.
Governments sometimes actively suppress languages too.
They do. Spain, at times, restricted Basque and Catalan in advertising to try and curb separatist feelings. France has the Académie Française, which actively fights English loanwords, coining official French alternatives to maintain linguistic purity. It's about controlling the national narrative through language.
And this idea of cultural hegemony, how does language fit in?
It's often subtle. Think about how blue jeans, originally American workwear, became a global symbol, sometimes seen as representing Western freedom or rebellion. Then ripped jeans become a fashion statement co-opted by capitalism. Language and symbols carry these layers, or governments trying to control naming practices. Thailand has official lists of good traditional names. Hugo Chavez in Venezuela published a list of 100 approved names to promote national identity. It's about shaping culture through linguistic choices.
What about English in India? Its dominance seems like a complex case.
Very complex. It stems from the colonial past, certainly, but also because many post-independence leaders were educated abroad. Plus, with India's immense linguistic diversity, English served as a neutral link language, and its role in higher education, science, and global literature reinforces its status.
It really connects back to social markers too, like class.
Definitely. You might hear someone subtly shift their accent or use more English words to signal a certain social standing, maybe perceived middle-class status. It can be conscious or unconscious. Sometimes people even hyper-correct, trying so hard to sound proper, they make mistakes they wouldn't normally make.
Like Priyanka Chopra's accent, again, a very conscious shift for a global career.
Right. And age is a huge factor. Youth slang creates bonds but also excludes older generations. Elders might stick to more traditional vocabulary as a marker of their own identity.
And gender, that seems like a whole area in itself.
It is. Robin Lakoff's early work pointed to patterns often associated with women's speech in some Western cultures, things like using more polite forms, rising intonation like asking a question, using tag questions. It's cold, isn't it? Deborah Tannen built on this, suggesting women often use language to build connection and rapport talk, while men might use it more to convey information or establish status, rapport talk. Of course, these are generalizations, but they highlight tendencies.
What about interaction styles?
Zimmerman and West's research noted things like women using more minimal responses, okay, to show they're listening, while men might be more likely to interrupt or change the topic. Again, context is everything. In Japan, women might traditionally add an o prefix to certain words like ohashi for chopsticks, marking politeness and femininity.
Even simple word choices signaled social nuances, like toilet versus lavatory or restroom.
Exactly. Social prestige is attached to certain ways of speaking, and even pronoun use tighter social networks might use we more, looser networks more I. Oh, and before we move on, we should quickly mention pidgins and creoles.
Right, those unique language forms.
A pidgin is a simplified language mashup that arises when speakers of different languages need to communicate, usually for trade or basic survival. Very limited vocabulary, simplified grammar.
Like a temporary bridge.
Sort of. But if that pidgin becomes stable and children start learning it as their first language, it develops into a fully complex natural language called a creole. Tiktok Pisin in Papua New Guinea is a great example. Started as an English-based pidgin. Now it's an official language with native speakers.
So language is just woven into everything, our identity, our politics, our social groups.
It's inseparable. It's the bloodstream of society in many ways.
But communication isn't just words, is it? We convey so much without speaking.
Oh, absolutely. Some estimates suggest over 75%, maybe even more, of the meaning we convey comes through nonverbal channels. Peter Drucker's quote is great. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said.
And nonverbal cues can sometimes give away more than words.
There's a theory by P.H. Title suggesting that when people are lying, their nonverbal signals often betray them because they're harder to consciously control than words. The body leaks the truth, so to speak.
What kind of nonverbal cues are we talking about?
A whole range. Posture, facial expressions, obviously, gestures, kinesics, how we use personal space, proxemics, tone of voice, vocalics, even things like handwriting or, these days, maybe even your choice of emojis or app store ratings.
Can you break down the gestures part a bit?
Sure. Linguists categorize them. Emblems are gestures with direct verbal translations, like a wave for goodbye or a thumbs up. Illustrators accompany speech, like miming, steering a wheel while talking about driving. Affect displays show emotion, a smile, a frown, maybe stamping your foot. Regulators control the flow of conversation, like nodding to encourage someone to continue or holding up a hand to interrupt. And adapters are usually unconscious actions, like jiggling your knee or fiddling with your hair when nervous.
And these gestures mean different things in different places.
Hugely different. The OK sign is a classic example. Good in the US India means zero or worthless in France, money in Japan, and is quite offensive in parts of Latin America and Malta. Gestures for showing female beauty vary wildly. A kissing fingertip in France, twirling a mustache in Italy, telescope hands in Brazil, whistling in India. You have to be careful.
What a touch.
Haptics. Big cultural differences here. You have high-touch cultures, Southern Europe, Latin America, Middle East, where physical contact during conversation is common, and low-touch cultures, East Asia, Northern Europe, Anglo-Saxon countries where it's much less frequent.
Like Indian men holding hands platonically, which might seem unusual elsewhere.
Exactly. Or think about political greetings, a handshake versus a bow versus a namaste. COVID really messed with this, didn't it? Suddenly, elbow bumps became the global norm for a while.
And silence. Can silence communicate?
Absolutely. Anthropologist Keith Basso's work with the Western Apache is famous for this. He found silence is used strategically. It can signify you're with strangers or used during courtship where too much talk is seen as superficial. Kids returning from boarding school might be met with silence initially, allowing them to readjust. Or if someone is ill or thought to be cursed, people might be silent around them, seeing them as temporarily not themselves. Silence has deep meaning.
And the way we say things.
Yeah.
The how.
Vocalics or paralanguage, this is everything except the words themselves. Tone, pitch, volume, speed, pauses, size, groans. It can completely change the meaning. Think of saying great sarcastically versus enthusiastically. Same word, opposite meaning purely through vocalics.
Like that Bollywood song example. Same lyrics, totally different meaning pre and post marriage based on tone.
Precisely. It underscores how much rides on the nonverbal.
So we communicate in rich, complex ways, verbal and nonverbal. But this richness is under threat, isn't it? Let's talk about endangered languages.
Yes, this is a really critical and frankly sobering issue. Each language is like a unique library, holding centuries of cultural knowledge, history, specific ways of seeing the world, ecological wisdom.
And the statistics are pretty grim.
They are alarming. Around 250 languages have gone extinct globally in just the last 50 years. In India alone, the number is similar, with nearly 200 languages currently listed as endangered. We talk about potentially endangered if there are fewer than 10,000 speakers. A language becomes sleeping when children are no longer learning it, even if adults still speak it, and extinct when the last native speaker dies, especially if there's no written record.
What's driving this loss?
Several factors converge. Cultural colonization is one, historical policies, like Macaulay's Minute in India aiming to create Indians English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect, actively devalued local languages. There's often social stigma attached to speaking minority languages. The lure of better jobs often means parents opt for schooling in a dominant language like English, sacrificing the mother tongue. Many languages are purely oral, so when the speakers die, the language dies. And the global dominance of languages like English pushes smaller languages aside.
And when a language dies, we lose more than just words.
We lose entire systems of knowledge. Think of traditional ecological knowledge, plant lore, sustainable farming practices, unique understandings of local ecosystems. There are documented cases of tribal healers whose knowledge of medicinal plants passed down orally holds potential cures for diseases like diabetes. When the language disappears, that library of wisdom often vanishes too.
Is anything being done to stop this? Are there preservation efforts?
Thankfully, yes. There are global initiatives like the Rosetta Project aiming to archive languages. Technology helps. Windows has been translated into Cherokee, for instance. In India, institutions like the Central Institute of Indian Languages in Mysore have initiatives like ESPL, creating primers, grammars, and dictionaries for endangered languages. Some state governments are actively documenting tribal languages.
More needs to happen.
Key steps include promoting mother tongue education, at least in early years, creating economic opportunities where speaking the local language is an asset, like local radio hosts, teachers, tourism guides. Urgently documenting languages before the last speakers are gone is crucial, and fixing administrative issues like census counts, sometimes not recording languages with fewer than 10,000 speakers, which makes them invisible. If you connect this loss to the bigger picture, Losing a language is like losing a species in the ecosystem of human thought. It diminishes our collective human heritage and wisdom. What does that loss mean for our future adaptability and understanding?
That's a really profound question. And it connects to how language can be used to categorize and sometimes control people. Let's look at that case study, the colonial creation of the tribe label in India.
Yes, this is a powerful example of linguistic categorization having massive real-world consequences. Colonial administrators, particularly the British, made a distinction. They separated caste communities seen as part of the mainstream hierarchical Hindu society from tribes,
How did they define tribes?
often as primitive, isolated groups living in forests or hills outside the caste system, often with animistic beliefs. They drew a sharp line that hadn't necessarily existed in the same way before.
And they used academic theories to back this up.
They did. Early classical evolutionists fit tribes into their staged model of cultural development, suggesting they were stuck in an earlier phase, justifying colonial rule as civilizing. Later, functionalists portrayed tribes as completely isolated, unchanging little sociological islands, denying their history and interactions with other groups.
Which ignored a lot of evidence, right?
Completely. Indian epics and historical records show centuries of interaction, intermingling, and shared histories between groups later labeled caste and tribe. Think of the Pandavas living with the Bills, or Ram interacting with Shabari. Post-colonial scholars argue convincingly that the rigid tribe category was largely an administrative construct, a tool for colonial governance. It allowed them to apply different laws, justify land alienation, terra nullius as empty land, and even create buffer zones or reservations, particularly in strategically important areas like Northeast India.
So a word, a label, used by those in power, fundamentally reshaped how society was understood and governed, often to the detriment of the people being labeled.
Precisely. It shows the immense power embedded in language, especially in the language used by institutions to define reality and justify actions.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a huge amount today. From the unique nature of human language, its building blocks, how it reflects culture and shapes thought,
To how it plays out in society, marking identity, fueling politics, shifting with context.
then moving beyond words to nonverbal communication, the tragedy of language loss, and the power of labels like tribe.
It really underscores that language isn't just this neutral tool for conveying information. It's a living, breathing entity, deeply entangled with our history, our minds, our societies. That two-way street with culture is fundamental.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. As you go about your day using language constantly, take a moment. What hidden assumptions, what cultural baggage, what historical echoes might be embedded in the very words you choose, the grammar you use? What might you discover about your own world if you started to really unpack the language you inhabit every single day?